All right, got it. Okay. So, right. So so you can hear me and everything? Yeah.
Yep.
Good. So yeah, so I've been playing with mobile things, actually very old mobiles, because that's all I can afford. But yeah, the oh, hang on. Wait a minute. What do? Yeah. So what really got me about these smartphones is that really they're actually little packages of sensors, and it seems like a waste to throw the old phones away. And Delphi claims to provide cross-platform access to all of those sensors, and it seemed like a really good idea. So I started playing both with the camera and particularly the GPS. And the whole aim of the project right from scratch was to, or the main aim was to sort of see what we could do with these sensors and learn to some extent how they were working. The first thing that I came across was the fact that, hey, like if you go right back to initially when FMX came out, I thought I'd just move all of, I'd work out how to put applications in FMX, some of the VCL applications, and it was a total no-go because the actual form on the phone is so different. So the first major learning curve was how the user interface needs to be adapted for, you know, well, very small screens in my case, because my original phone had a very small screen. And so the first decision was to sort of get around was to choose a multi-layer tab control template. So if no. Oh. Yeah, so this is the, you can see that we haven't lost the screen. You can see Delphi there.
Yeah, you got the Zoom dialogue in front. You might just want to click on "Got It" on
Oh,
Zoom.
you want that? Is that better? Yeah.
Still there.
Hang on, what Zoom dialogue?
That might be on your screen, Roger. Rob, sorry.
Yeah, I think
I clicked it on mine.
we all got that. It was the notification about that he was recording the meeting.
For us. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, that's okay. I'm not thinking of.
Yes, it's for us.
Yeah. So do you guys get the? Does that blank out part of the screen when I can see you or not? That doesn't. You can still see the right hand side of the screen, can you?
Yeah, it's okay once you close that dialogue.
Yeah, no, everything's fine, Roger. We can't see any obstruction.
Just lots of. For some reason, when we go to U3A, if the guy's got the pictures up the side, you wind up with a black line on his screen. But I didn't seem to do that on mine. Anyway.
No, there is an obstruction. I can see the little window with you or whoever talks comes up on the right-hand side and obscures the screen.
Is that better now? No, you guys.
Peter, I think that's your choice.
That's your choice. You've got to make it small if you want it.
Or drag it onto your other monitor.
Yeah. The little white bar at the top will make it go up and down as long as I'm not imposing it on you. Yeah. So this is the this is the template that came out. It was either Delphi Berlin or Tokyo that I was playing with. So it's actually got just tab controls across the top, which was really nice. But then it had a dual tab. So if I bring this down, you can see that, oh, yeah, why is the, There we go. Yeah. So you've got the tabs on the top, but then these ones here had secondary tabs. So there's, in this case, 4 tabs within. So this is really good to just sort of keep adding stuff. The only thing is that I don't believe this tab is off, this template is offered with Rio and Sydney anymore. I don't know whether, so I mean, it was just the one that I chose. And yeah. And the other thing that confused me somewhat was, now hang on. Oh, it's running. That's why it's, there we go. That looks better. That was why it was a bit funny, because the app was running, yeah. So the other thing that I don't know, you guys probably all know this, but this was new to me. There's actually no code behind this button that was on the thing, the back button, because it's actually an action. So there's no code anywhere, but then when I tried to put that on the second tab sheet I introduced the action to the second tab sheet, it didn't work. You actually have to add the actions. And as I say, you probably all know. So first thing is on the button, you add the action and the action populates the back. And then in the action, you have to say, we know it's a tab action because you've added a tab action, but you actually have to tell it the tab control. So when I added the second, so that's what came with the template, was one back button on one tab control within the progress tab. But when I added a tab control within the measurement tab, then I had to have a second action because this one has to play on this tab control and not on the one previously. The other bit that broke when I introduced this is, like with the blank template, the gesture worked really well and you could swipe forward and back. But when I started putting things on the tab control, like edit boxes and so on, that's busted up the gesture management, and I haven't even looked at it. I just introduced these back buttons and forward buttons to navigate around the tab control. So, but that was the first major issue that I came, you know, to get my head around, was the how to get some reasonable amounts of data on a little tiny screen. I suppose there were also ways of doing it with extra forms and all the rest of it. That multi-layer tab control seemed like a really good way of doing it. But as I said, I can't get gestures to work on it. Not that I've tried very hard. The next thing mostly was actually how to deliver the software. I don't know whether I was actually thinking about this or I just noticed on our grade ADUG list at the time that somebody asked the question about how to get software onto your Android, and they said, you just get the APAC, the APAC file out of Delphi and put it on a website and you can download it onto your phone. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. And so going back then, that worked really well. But I found that the next problem was that when you went to the phone, when you went to one of my typical old websites, it was almost impossible to navigate the website to get down to the button to download the software. So then I had to look at, I keep all of my documentation in help and manual, and I found that there was by choosing, So I went looking for the thing. Is that mine reverberating, or is it somebody else's? Like, yeah.
No way to tell, Rog.
Ah, yeah. No, I can't see anybody else lighting up, but I've actually turned the heater off because I thought it was going to make a noise in the thing. Anyway, so in help and manual, I was able to, so I actually needed a responsive web page so that it would fit on the phone. And by choosing a responsive skin in help and manual, I was able to make a thing that sets it up, and therefore the download actually becomes quite easy within help and manual. So on the web page, so this page comes up, it's not exactly great on a phone, but it does work on a phone much better than the old, the more typical type of web pages that I used to download my software with.
We use Dropbox for that sort of thing. That if you want to get it on just a random phone sort of thing, if you've got they're all your own phones, have Dropbox app on the phone.
Yeah, you just put what is it, an APK file, is it? And you can download it.
Yeah, if you put the APK file in your Dropbox folder on your computer, and then use the Dropbox app on the phone.
Dropbox app on the phone. Okay.
Yeah. And then you can go and navigate to it that way and just find the APK in the Dropbox app and click on it and say install.
Because what I've found now is, and I think I posted something up on the web page, this sort of doesn't work very well anymore because, hey, the browsers on the phone have suddenly stopped accepting these. Well, certainly Firefox won't accept the file because it's not security. So that all that trouble sort of, yeah. So I have trouble putting it on other people's phones now. I have, but yeah, so maybe Dropbox and then a Dropbox app on people's phones, that's a hard way of doing it. I mean, it's okay for me because I plug it into the computer and it downloads across. But if I want to get it on somebody else's phone to have a play with it, it becomes a bit difficult. But
well, someone else's phone, you could still from Dropbox, you could generate just a regular HTTP link to that location in your Dropbox account, and then they wouldn't need to install Dropbox. You just have to email them the link to that site, and that'd be an HTTPS fully with proper certificates and so on. And
right. Okay, so that's but anyway, in the process of playing with all of this, and as I said, GPS was my focus originally. So the first thing I did was a navigation, the concept of actually taking, because GPS gives you longitudes and latitudes, and I started looking at what you could do with that. I was aware there were lots of formulas for doing this stuff. So the solution that I came up with is it's just a Delphi record, but the record actually contains the so I found that I was switching between degrees and radians, because when you want to do a sine or a cosec or something, you need radian values, but when you want to print it out, you need degrees and seconds. There's a whole lot of code in movable type code.uk, which actually puts all of this, how to do it all. So it's mostly JavaScript, but I could put all of that script within the Delphi record, and that allows me to do distance and bearing from another location. So they offer two solutions. One is simple, which assumes the Earth is actually a sphere. And the second one, I don't understand the maths, but it says it's a precision way of doing it, and it actually allows for the bulging equator model of the Earth. So there's the major diameter across the equator and a minor diameter across the poles. And it's an iterative solution. And then the JavaScript stuff falls over when you've got directly opposite sides of the Earth. So if you're trying to find a distance, so I fiddled around a bit and put some additional code in to cope with the thing when the two spots you were looking for were on opposite sides of the Earth. Then the Delphi application provided Google Map links. So I played with coming up with the Google links to the particular location, and then text representations of the location. That is, if you have a location and you want it to appear as, instead of a decimal degrees, but in degrees, minutes, seconds, and fractions of a second. So all of that happens within one Delphi record. And so, well, within Delphi record. So the first record will let you find, so you create the record using either decimal values or radian values. And then having got the record, you can actually find a location at so many meters along this bearing, and then you get another record, which is the location at that location. And you can also specify that in radians. And then the other one is, how far is it between this record and another record? And you come back with a number of meters. Or you go a bit more complex and you say, what's the location 500 meters in a particular direction, bearing in mind that the opposite bearing will be different, because unless you're going up and down the meridian of longitude, then the angles will be different as you cross the different meridians. So that was fun to play around with. If we look at that in Delphi, wait a minute. I thought it was there. Should I just close it? Yeah. Yeah. So then I have a little application that just sort of plays with that, which is the one that was running before, which I couldn't, which was why everything looked a bit funny. So if we, oh, there we go. So this is just a real little talk about Lachlan's application being just a whack together. This is a real whack together. But first of all, we've got the longitude and latitude put in for Moorabbin Airport, the actual NDB on Moorabbin Airport. And we've got So just to do the Go Google, so source longitude, source latitude, and Go Google. And it comes up with the location. So the reason I chose airport stuff was because if you go to the navigation maps, you can actually get the longitude and latitude of their nav aids. So if you put that in, and here you can see the location that the application dropped you to, and here you can see the 2 towers and the navigation aid, and presumably that's the decimal rounding between the things. So that's basically just repeating what the sample GPS app did within the samples. But we also have the ability, and you can see here that we've been able to take a decimal and simply convert it into degrees, minutes, seconds, and however many decimal places in the seconds that you want. Then take another, the Point Cook NDB. So now we have 2, and here are the distances from Point Cook to Moorabbin and the bearing. I don't think we have the reverse bearing there, and you would see that the reverse bearing was different if we did that. And now if you do a Go Google, it has actually got the Raft Basin and Moorabbin, and because it's Google directions, it's gone around. I'm sure there's Google links that you can set up, which would give you a straight line or a circle, but I haven't looked at that at this stage. But it would be nice to be able to do that. And the other point about this is there's also a Google scale. So you can give a Google scale. So if we go to 20, oh, sorry, we'll first of all Google in on the, so this is the Point Cook thing. If we change the scale from 17 to say 15, it actually changes the scale of the Google map. So using that, I was able to put the center point for the Google directions in the middle of the direct line between the two. So if we actually go back to see the code in this, hang on. Google tab form, yeah. So Go Google, that button, all it needs to do is it just creates the record, the Navlong lat record. We put the scale in to that record, and then say Go Google, and Go Google does the code that would have been in the sample app, which adds a bit around it, and then does a shell execute in this case. So this only worked, so the shell execute is only in Windows. What outside Windows on the phone, you just, I simply get the Google link and then feed it in. But on Windows, I can do a shell execute. which is rather useful. Okay. Not sure about any. So you can actually see the label text is just location text with the number of bits in there. So, but all of this stuff, basically all of my knowledge around navigation is able to be encapsulated into the one record. And if I learn something else, I can put it in the record. So it becomes a way of noting everything. And I think if you're going to be playing with longs and lats, I think that's a useful library to have. Okay, so that was the first set of stuff. So that's one library. Now, the plan was always to put these libraries up on GitHub. I had a bit of a, and they're there now. So yeah, so there's a navigation library. The other one is actually the sensor library. I wasn't all that keen with sort of dropping these things on the just using the drag and or the standard way of dropping the things on the phone form. It greatly limited. So, and also I wanted to actually look at what the sensors did. So the sensor library actually starts off with a manager of all sensors. And if so we'll get rid of all of these. No, navigation utilities. So mobile sensor, right. So there's a sensor manager, and it just lets you get the app, finds the sensors that are sitting within the device and prints out a list of them. And it also acts as a global registry so that you can actually stop all the sensors from working, just disable all the sensors or reset them all. Then mobile sensors. And the way this, so the sensors work, or the way it works now is that you actually have an on-change. Whenever there's an on-change event, it pops out and you can actually use that on-change event. So, but the yeah. Now, by setting up my own sensors, I was actually able to set up a dummy sensor so that I could set up how the form would work. But the sensor manager will actually give a list of sensors on the device. So that was something that I felt was useful right at the start. You run it on the phone and it gives you a list of the sensors. Most of the code here is basically just taking the Java, the Java code, I suppose, the Java the Java constants and converting them to properties within the thing. So so there was the sensor manager, and then first of all, I started off with the location sensor because that was the one that I was interested in. And then I wanted to also look at the other sensors, the orientation sensor and the gravity sensor, or the accelerometer sensor. Those other two sensors seem to require a triggering event. So I started off with the base class of a timer event so that so that the sensors triggered at regular intervals, instead, whereas the location sensor would supposedly trigger whenever the location changed. I wanted to delve a bit deeper because the whether the sensor went off or not seemed to be a bit funny, and I wanted to get values between the sensor stuff, but and then having built the location sensor logic, I then backfed that in so that they all inherit from this timer sensor, so that a lot of the code then is the same type of stuff, which is basically if we stop it running, all the code comes down really into this get values code, where you just do a loop. And whenever the sensor changes, where is it? So whenever the sensor changes, then if the sensor has that property, then you go and have your Delphi property the same as the sensor error radius. So yeah, so just lots of code to sort of, but all very useful. And it means that to actually use the sensor, you just simply set up your sensor change code and it drives the thing. So if we go back to our form, so whenever the location changes, then you can go through and change you come into this routine and you can then change all of the values on the form. But most importantly was the fact that by having, by having my own sensor, I was able to fit a dummy sensor in that does sorts of things so that I could actually test the code out. So that the application actually runs away there and it's changing. The next thing that I wanted to do was that the settings of the dummy on this case, of course, is that it's actually just a slight variation, the way I thought the GPS would ideally work. And we had something like this. It was what I started off with was the location of where I was at and how far it was from the start. And that sort of looked really nice, but then I realised that was pretty useless, because like if you go for a walk or something, if you go for a drive, you often come back to where you started. So this field here would go out to a large distance, and then you'd walk around the thing. So what I actually wanted to do was I wanted to find out how far I'd travelled. That didn't seem too hard. It was just a matter of adding the stuff on, and you know, sort of each time you got a sample that the location had changed, you worked out the distance from the record and add them up. I thought I was walking many miles though, and we'll come back to that later when we look at some of the real-time data. So what I found was that I actually then needed to actually look at trying to work out what the GPS was giving me. And so the next library that we came up with was actually a library to plot the points as they were being delivered, so that I could understand what it was. Or rather, what I started with was just a list of the values that had come in. And I was able, but that's pretty hard to analyse what it was. But by producing the third library, which is actually the graphics type thing, so that third library oh yeah, just a comment on the yeah. So this was plotting utility. So it's got two things, two classes, IS graphics and nav graphics. So the IS graphics just allows you to work on a canvas and draw horizontal scale bars and vertical scale bars and add text. And then the next one actually converts the nav. So there are slight changes when you, so it takes the navigation records and plots them on a scale, and it allows for the fact that the navigation, the longitudes and latitudes sort of narrow as you get to the poles, so that you wind up with so that you wind up with proper diagrams. So if we look at yeah, so we'll have to go with this one. So this little app just demonstrates the sorts of things that so basically using the if we go to what that, not that form, this form, the test button. No, that's not quite very obvious, but what the test button does is it generates, using a record, it generates a whole set of plot points 1 kilometre from the centre point, and plots it around, and then we put it on the plot. Changing this bottom one actually changes the location of the scale bar here. So the scale and the heading is all just sort of put in by the, so once you've got the, which is rather neat, but also this allows you to if we keep going, we've got a test, but you can actually relocate the center of the map. So all of this stuff is done with this library. So what this requires is that you take that point. You want this to be the new origin. You take it, you work out what that is in terms of graphical units, then work out what it is in terms of navigation units, and then put it in as the new reference center point for the graph. And you can also zoom in, zoom out, or zoom in onto the graph, and that's all done within this one library. So add a scale, get a scale, relocate points from nav. So, yeah. Right. So sensor library, graphics library. So yeah, adjust the X scale to land, can apply jitter. Now, as I said, jitter suppression. So what? So what we found was when we just added them all together, we wound up that it was actually rubbish, that it didn't. So you actually, because the GPS actually has quite a lot of jitter in it, in that the positions don't quite add together. If I look at a so we'll just look at one of the. Oh, sorry, yeah, it's the one. Yeah, so this is actually, I'll explain how we got this later, but this is sort of what the GPS gave us for a walk around the block. And you can see that if you just plotted it, it's jagged all over the place. So therefore my walks around the block were not only different every time, but were actually a lot further than the distance around the block. So we were looking at trying to get rid of that. Analysing it, we found, so this was before I actually had the mapping capability. But yeah, there were sort of what seemed to be glitches. So we actually named them glitches because there'd be suddenly a reading that was off to the side, or, you know, that was followed almost immediately by another reading that went back to where it was. So, that's just glitches. So we'll remove the glitches and round up with quite a nice space, not perfect, but a nice way of doing it, so that I was actually getting reasonable types of distance travelled, rather than having all of these extra distances travelled. so that's really the reason that as I said, it was very difficult to analyse it on the from the list of stuff, and plotting the graph made it a lot more easy to understand. So, but we'll come back to some of those later. And then the final thing out of is when Rio was introduced, you then had to ask permissions. Prior to Rio, you simply said you wanted to use the GPS, and the permissions were put into the file, the manifest file for you. But with Rio, it wasn't, and we saw last week that Locke had to have a little bit of code that he took to actually ask for the permissions. But I decided to actually put all that into a single function that codified it all again, so that I would be able to use it on lots of programs and not have to remember what I did and cut and paste. So it just basically consists of a single function. So it turns simple categories, i.e. I want GPS, or I want a camera, or I want a data acquisition permission, and turn that into a sort of do that, get those permissions at the start of the program, and manage the return dialogue. So when you look at the examples, there was a dialogue that comes back with the return. And on top of that, there's a dummy stub for where, as in this case, the stuff's running on is not running on Android, so it doesn't work. And also if the code is pre-Rio, where that software isn't available. So yeah, so the permissions is really, this is really simple, I think, except for the fact that there's a whole lot of, so there's just, I just looked at all of the permissions that were there. But basically you get a single procedure. Oh, actually, it's not gonna run for me, this one, because I'm running it on, so I've got to go to the Android version, because it's, so request permissions is the function. That's the Android stuff. So, but basically I've got a bit of code that sort of looks at what's involved in a permission. So I'm saying if I want a GPS permission, then put in these Java classes into an array. So basically packages up the array depending on what's in the request. So sorry, there's lots of notes there for my purposes in the future, but yeah. And so you say permissions granted, what's the set of permissions you want, whether you want a dialogue if it passes or a dialogue if it fails, and a return reference and the return reference class. So the number of permissions, so if you want Cambrian, you've got to add these Java classes, and then having built up the array, you pass it the permissions that you want, and the return the return will show the message if it passes, if you've asked for it, or if it fails, it'll show the message of what was not available, and also it goes to the return procedure with the permissions that you've got. Good result, permissions granted, permission partial, yeah. So if we go back to the if we run, you'll see that, but again, it's got the dummy capability so that we actually get a little box up to say that failed because it was dummy position. So that's what happens. Right? But again, all packaged into a permissions library, which only has one function in it, but quite a bit of functionality. Right. So now a little bit out of order, but here's the glitch suppression we came out. So the location points returned by the GPS jump about a little bit. Approach this in two ways. In the graphics unit, only plot points exceeding a particular number of meters. So you choose a value and you say, well, if it hasn't moved more than so many meters, ignore it. And, you know, that might be 50 meters or something. And in the main form, attempting to get the distance traveled, which is what we were doing. So ignore position n+1 if position n equals within a very small amount, position n+2. So just simply ignore that value and flag it as a glitch. So that's the sorts of ways that I was struggling to try and get a meaningful distance measurement and a meaningful plot of where we were going. Now these are two of the plots. Oh, sorry. These are two of the plots that we're actually getting from leaving the phone sitting on top of the computer. So the phone wasn't actually moved, but you can see as far as the by plotting all of the values over quite a period of time, there's sort of 20-meter drops. I don't know which phone this was, whether it was my very early Android or my latest one, I'm not sure, because I've played with both of them. Probably the earlier one, but it just spreads out all over the place. And another way of doing it was, and this is actually in the location sensor, is actually to take an average. So we were taking averages of 10. And this is sort of the type of, so got it down to a whole range, only varied by, say, 5 or 6 meters, but still, given that one of the ways that I wanted to use this was, I thought, well, if I can just have a phone that I can sit on a particular location and it can keep generating results until I get a really accurate result, I built in averaging within the location sensor, and these are the plots of the averages. So the GPS, well, I don't know, it's probably quite adequate for what it does, but I think Google and that is doing a lot of smarts after gets the GPS readings, which.
Did you see much of a difference between the GPSs of your two phones?
Yep. Especially the early one, which is like, it's probably going on for 8 or 9 years old now. And when we had it out back, the GPS, I'm not sure what level of the software was at, but the GPS just stopped returning values. And I think possibly when I had a look in terms of the satellites that the GPS systems, I think that the phone doesn't support the latest GPS satellites. So I think sometimes it was actually running out of satellites because like there's 3 or 4 different versions of satellites. I'm trying to think back to what I looked at. So yeah, so the old phones. Oh, and the other thing, of course, is that you can actually, the phone will use the towers as well. To try and smooth out its GPS readings, it'll use the phone towers if there's a SIM card in it. But with the old phone, I was able to turn off the towers. The new phone, the latest phone, is not nearly so. You've got much less control over it. So the new phone is definitely better, but we can have a look later because I've got some actual plotted data. So we'll have a look at the difference between the 2 phones. I think it depends on, yeah. The other thing that I found very annoying, and I don't know, somewhere one of the applications did this, but the hardware back button on the phone would go back. Well, if you hit the hardware back button, your application would close. Oh yeah, that's right. So that was the sort of the standard way with, I think, yeah, pretty sure that if you touch the hardware back button, the application would just close. And then looking at the GPS app from somebody else that was also on my phone, the one that came delivered with the phone, I noticed that it actually asked the question, do you really want to close GPS? So then I looked at how to handle the hardware back button. So you've got to capture the back key, you've got to process a hardware back, and then only if it's the far right pane of this great multi-line pane do you actually ask the question, do you want to exit GPS? So that was the first time I had a look at trying to do the message dialogue. So if we go to Delphi, now I haven't been able to standardize this, haven't tried much, but so it's actually, it's in the tab form. If I have to stop it so that I can find the code. I think it's called process hardware back, yeah. So so this is if the back key is the hardware back key, it goes into this routine. And so this becomes very much specific on the form, i.e. if the active tab is this tab, the general nav tab, which is the most leftmost tab, then you want to know whether the active tab in the one below it is the leftmost or one of the others. So it's only if it's the leftmost tag of the leftmost secondary tag do you actually say, well, do you wish to exit GPS? And then you've got this little bit of a procedure that says, you know, whether or not you're going to close it. But if not, then you just simply do tab control nav previous. So you just simply go back one. And if it's not the leftmost main tag, then if it's in the measurement tag, which was the second tag, then again, you've got to do the same thing. And if it's not either of those 2 tabs, then you've got to do it. So I'd like to have a way that all of that, I could just say, well, this is a multi-tabbed form. and I've got a hardware back button, but at the moment it's all very much specific to the forum. But I think there's a place to do that, because at the moment, every time you do an application like this, you're going to have to go through and write this bit of code specially, and I'm sure it can be done automatically. But yeah, so that was something else that was required, because it was really annoying to get a whole lot of stuff and then just go, oh, the application's closed. Right. And this is it. So started off, I've got this application. It goes and does GPS. I start off first of all by just when the adding up the different incremental steps doesn't give me anything that looks like how far I've actually walked or driven. I go back and actually look at the GPS results in a list, which is on the phone, and I do some analysis, and I can see some of these glitches, and I can turn the towers on and off, but all of the stuff is on the phone, and you've got to do it before you turn the app off, and it's all very hard. So the next stage, I say, well, after I've gone out and had a walk and come back and I want to analyse the results, I have a button that says that I can save the data, and I save the graphics data and the measurement data as CSV files and bump files. And so save the trip results, and then I can drag them from the phone, which was okay, but it was very cumbersome. And then when 10.4 came out, when 10.4 came out, suddenly I wasn't able to save them in the documents file. It didn't allow it. And I can still save files, but I have a hell of a job finding out where they are. They must be there because I can save them and I can retrieve them. I was using Rio so I went back to using Rio so I could actually save them in documents file, like the shared documents, which is easily accessible from the computer. But also it was a pain in the butt, and I wanted it. So now, what I've come up with recently is I've been able to generate snapshots of the program. So periodically take snapshots and upload them into the database online, and then a separate VCL app, which we just had a look at, which enables an in-depth analysis of the data, and also using T-chart. And I had to actually duplicate. Okay, so I wanted a VCL app because I wanted access to T-chart, which I've only got in VCL, whereas my graphics library was at FMX. So I duplicated that. It wasn't very hard. It's got the same interface, but I had to change the way the plots work, but that was really quite easy. So that's where we're at now. So if we actually, yeah, so this is the data that, so now, as you see, we actually have, these are samples of the database. I've actually deleted a lot of them, but the online database has quite a few samples, and you can actually look at the values. You can try the different glitch things. So I can, instead of having to change the glitch parameters and load the new stuff into the form, I can actually change algorithms and that in this program. and perhaps improve it or choose what values that I choose for, you know, what algorithms I choose for trying to smooth it out, the smoothing algorithms that I use. But also we can use T-chart. So I can and I can actually plot what's happening on the computer. So basically, these little things here are the sampling points when a sample was uploaded to the database, and these are the actual GPS values, and the green lines are the times when the averager kicked off. So it took its 11 GPS values and an averager went off, and then another lot of values, the little brown lines, really quickly. The actual, at the moment, the height of the line is how long since the last value was taken. So you can see it started off taking GPS values very slowly. Then it started taking them really fast, and then a little bit more slowly. But the averager was jumping up on, and then there's a sample there of 30 or 40 samples. Here, the sampler goes off again. When the sampler goes off next time, it's taken 80 samples. And then, so the amount this increases is the rate of which GPS samples are coming in and being stored. And as I said, these are the averages, and these are the orange ones are the sample time. So you can now start to have a look, and it's interesting to see that, hey, the GPS system is going off slowly there, then it suddenly goes off very fast. Probably this was before I started walking, so these are all the little bits. So it wasn't actually moving, and then for some reason, as you start walking, it sort of starts to go off. Seems to be very good when you're driving along in the car at 30 miles an hour. You get nice regular GPS checks, but when you're walking around or the thing's stationary on the ground, the GPS seems to be very, it doesn't go off all the time. I thought that was just sort of in the Delphi implementation of it, which is why I built my own location sensor to get around some of that stuff, because but even by reading around the Delphi stuff and reading what I think is the GPS sensor in the phone, it doesn't necessarily give good results. But this looks pretty well behaved, but it jumps around all the time. Just going back, I think this was my newer phone. Yeah, compiler is Sydney, so it's an A11, and that note says that there was a similar plot. I had the two phones at the one time, but I've probably deleted the other thing. So yeah, so that's the analysis to capture. It was interesting. It was I started off because this is not part of the this sampling is not part of the stuff that my super application, which is not going anywhere anymore, the Android Examiner sensor stuff that I put on GitHub, but it's a another application, another compile that does it. But I wanted to actually use all of this code, and so this is how I achieved it. So here's the normal form code. You've got the create form. And so the other application just doesn't have this line here, GPS save DB create in it. So now this was interesting here for people who are doing FMX on Android, in that initially what I passed into this create was the actual tab navigation form, right. So it says create form T tab navigation and put it in this variable, right? So I passed that into here, which seemed like a good idea, because then I could just simply, within this unit here, which has a thread in it, I could simply interrogate the values that the form had saved on the phone. But at this point in the software, this value was always nil on the Android, not on the Windows device, but on the Android. It's always a pain to find these things because it's really hard to debug on the Android. But yeah, so in fact, I vaguely remember coming across this problem before, that create form doesn't actually create the form. It only sets it up to be created, and the create form happens somewhere in the application run. So by adding this parameter here, so I've just got true and false. I'm not quite sure what the true and false are. Yeah. So true is yes. So the database operates in two modes. One is it's got a form, so it will gather the data and it will transfer it to the database. And the other one is do the database locally. It's false because we want the database actually up on the internet. So by doing that, the data was, so this thing actually has access to the code for this form. I mean, you know, I don't know about the NPM and all the rest of it, but it actually has to know the format of the form. But it was a matter of shoehorning a data collection system into the existing code. So it knows about the form, it knows where all of the data is, it knows the sensor value, so it can gather all of its data. The fact that it's false. So it actually has it has an update thread in it, which has an execute, which simply so here's the first bit. So actually, when it starts executing, it says the user interface. If the user interface is nil, then equate it to the tab with navigation form, and while it's nil, keep looping until it's no longer nil. So it does a couple of loops with nil, and then suddenly it finds that the form's been created. And then after that, it then assigns itself to the forms on close query, so that we will actually get the sample before we close the application. And then while it's going, it just loops through every X number of seconds, every 200 seconds, it'll take a sample. And taking a sample just means going and getting all the data and sending it up to updating the object in the database and sending it up to the cloud. Then the same code then works. If you don't give it an interface, then it just becomes a way of giving you access to the data and analysing the data, which is what we've got with this application here. Yeah. So this is like my old phone won't compile. That was one of the things with the whole aim of the exercise was to use old phones. So I've actually had to keep a Berlin version of Delphi because the old, the old, that's the only one that'll, or Berlin, Tokyo with a bit of hacking will actually compile software for the phone. So where the compiler is Berlin, that's the old phone. Where the compiler is Sydney, that's the new phone. So that example of data that we looked at before was actually on the new phone. And this is 231 samples sitting on the desktop. So pretty good, really. It stays pretty good. But this is where I think it becomes interesting when you look at the actual sampling. And this is the problem that I have now is that so this is just 2 or 3 hours, 3.5 hours. Everything was fine. There was a steady ray, so it was actually taking samples, and then suddenly everything stopped. Then I don't know whether I touched it or not, but then it started taking samples, then everything stopped. And then it took a few more samples and everything stopped. Well, here you can see that it took a sample just when we turned it off. So the phone is actually going to sleep. So that's another problem that what I want. I mean, I'm hoping somebody might be able to tell me how to manage that or what permissions I need. I don't know, but yeah. But as I say, it's really nice with T-chart because you can actually. Oh, wait a minute. You can actually. Oops. You can actually sort of just zoom in and get nice clear examples. So, every 5 samples, 5. I thought it took 11 samples, and then it would go away and do an average. And yeah, zoom. But yeah, but this is. So just leaving it on the desk overnight, we get, do I have an example of that? I'm not sure whether to. Overnight and no takers, yeah. No, yeah. So yeah, so this is another one. So the other one you saw it actually stopped sampling, but this one it's sampling quite happily all night. But suddenly it takes a whole. So it didn't do any samples at all at first. Then it did a whole lot of samples, and then it did no more samples. So suddenly in the middle of the night, I'm sure I wasn't up walking around at that time of night or touching it or anything. It just took a couple of samples and then, in fact, that's all. It just took the occasional sample. So, don't know. So these are all, but the point being that this is a really good way of being able to analyze the data, because you can see exactly what's going on, and as long as you remember what you were doing, compared with having to remember to press save. Hopefully the application didn't sort of suddenly stop. But anyway, so yeah, so I've really given up on it, but I'm still interested. But the issues that I'm having is the ever-changing mobile environment. New Delphi versions do not support the older models. So I've got to keep a VM with Berlin in it to keep developing for the old phones, which is what I want to do. As I said, you know, it's got a great, it still has a GPS sensor, which is useful, but it's got accelerometers and cameras and all of that sort of stuff in. Keeping the phone operating in continuous operation. All I can find out is that you can make it so that it keeps operating for half an hour, but that's only by manually doing that. So I don't know. There's obviously controls that you can use within Android to do it. And as I said, the GPS sensors seem to go out of date. I'm quite sure that my old phone, I don't think it's just a matter that it's less accurate. It seems that it doesn't have it cannot handle, or it may not, I'm not saying it can't, it may not be able to handle the latest satellites. There was sort of 4 of each. I don't really understand that, but it certainly didn't like it in outbacks. That might just have been there was no tower, no mobile coverage. But anyway, it wasn't just my application. The actual GPS app that came with the phone didn't work in outback in some outback areas. Delphi 10.4 makes access to the phone more difficult, especially in the it's tightened security down, so you can't get access to the shared data, and it seems to close down. So I could only get access to the GPS while it was in use, but as you saw, the sampler was still working. So for the most part, the threaded sampler's code was still working. I'm not able to open documents in common files. And then coming home one day, my phone decided to update itself to Android 11, and all of the compiles pre-Sydney no longer work. So for a while there, I was able to actually compile code in Berlin, and it would go on the Android 10 phone, and or Rio, compile them on Berlin or Rio, and they would run on the Android 10 phone. If it was a Berlin compile, it would complain that it was an old app and do I want to get an upgrade? But once it went to Android 11, those applications no longer work. And I did discuss it on the ADUG website, and a lot of people came up with having the same thing, which, while it doesn't worry me at all, it actually is a problem if you're going to develop stuff for the Android phone in Delphi, because for some reason the phone upgrades itself and all of your applications stop. So anyway, that's sort of where I'm at the moment. I don't think I'm going to be doing anything very much, but it's been interesting and it's good fun. And as I said, oh, sorry, I didn't. The booze share. Oh, just that is all we need, isn't it? Share. Oh no, not that one. No. I'll just share again. Share the lot. Yeah. Yeah. So the stuff is all on the code is on GitHub. That was it itself. Yeah. I put the code in GitHub in a private repository, and then I was just going to make it public when I got it finished. I then spent 3 hours trying to work out how to make a GitHub repository from private to public. Gave up and copied all the files across. And then when I came to delete the old copies, found the spot where you can change it. So yeah, but that's just typically me. There's online documentation there, which is what we've been sort of glancing back. Oh, and vicinity solutions, which if you're into the, yeah. So this is the code if you're into, these are the formulas, especially for the precision stuff from a start point, direct solution, and the iterative solutions, yeah. And the sorts of justification. I could probably understand it if I wanted to spend enough time at it, but I just simply took the JavaScript and turned it into Delphi. So that's where I'm at. I don't know. Do we have any questions, or nobody's interested in GPS and navigation and all that sort of stuff?
Put the GitHub reference back up. I was too quick. You were too quick for me to write it down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sorry. So I've got to share the screen again, do I? Yeah.
You could copy and paste it into a note.
I will put it up onto the. Yeah, I'll put the reference up.
I'll put it in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I'll post this. I'll post this on the meetings page. That makes sense, doesn't it? Just the references, but yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure whether it's worth saving the PowerPoint. Probably not. The documentation sort of basically has what we've talked about more or less, because it's been basically my notes as I've been playing with it. So unless somebody particularly wants the PowerPoint, I don't propose to put it up, but I will if somebody wants it. I can either put it up on my site for download or put it up on the.
Jeffrey Smith's just put it in the chat, so you can copy it and paste it, or click on the link and your browser will take you there. So.
Oh, good. What's that? The
chat. If you go down to the bottom of the screen, there's a chat icon. You just click on that.
I can't see it. Yeah, hang on.
And you'll then be able to see the link.
Oh, good.
Thank you for that, Roger. You must have put months of work into that.
I've been playing with it for ages, but I don't know whether anybody else is interested.
I'm just using the Firefox browser, and I just clicked on. Oh, that was interesting. This time my browser is happy to go to your website, but when I tried it half an hour or so ago, there was a problem with it. But no, everything's all right now. Thank you.
What, the browser?
Well, there's nothing to worry about. There's no problem now. So.
Oh, I don't know. So this is for the documentation, is it? Or GitHub?
No, just forget it. I said everything's okay. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time on my website. It's only for, but yeah, but it was interesting to be able to just go with help and manual and saying, well, hey, I want a responsive web page, and so you just say, oh yeah, rightio, we'll use a responsive skin, and suddenly, I mean, it's not the greatest of, but it works, and it works a lot better on the phone than, but not my. I mean, let's have a look. So this is my phone. Oh, hang on, it actually looks bigger there. It actually looks, I need it. A4 page, that's my phone, which is what I like because it fits in my pocket. But yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do when 3G drops off, but for now, I've still got it. But I managed to get a more up-to-date cheap Android in the middle of lockdown last year.
Nokia's got some nice smaller sized Androids.
Have they?
Yeah. Yeah, theirs aren't necessarily all huge.
Yeah. I just, the concept of having this great big iPad thing as a phone just doesn't turn me on at all. But
Yeah.
Do you know?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask about, do you know if commercial, like mapping software and that, if it uses the inertial stuff, the accelerometers to correct for the errors in GPS?
I don't know, just looking at it, and in fact, I've noticed it. So with the Google Maps app, I have noticed that occasionally copper glitch. You know, you see that it jumps off the road, but I think what they're actually doing is they're actually getting the GPS reading and then assuming that you're on the road and dragging it to the road. Does that?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that's what they're using, I suspect, because it's not particularly.
Never accurate the distance. Like the other day, I was driving and it was 150 metres off, and I'm 30 metres from the corner, and it's saying it's 200 metres down the road, sort of thing.
That's what I mean. I think that possibly. I mean, obviously, my old phone is got a very old GPS chip in, and it's probably not. But and the new one is better. But it doesn't.
Oh, they could be terrible. And adding to your problem, at one time I wanted to go for lunch in the city, so I thought, I'll use my brand new, A11 Samsung. Yeah. Before you know it, it's sending me down the wrong streets. It was going so far off with all the reflections on the buildings.
Well, that's what I think. I think that it's sort of it's actually jumping. So if it's off by far enough,
enormous amount.
It could be in the city where you've got buildings everywhere.
Oh, I'm sure I was being pushed like 3 and 4 blocks away from where I was meant to be, and I ended up being like 10 metres to the side. That's where the bloody restaurant was, and I do a great loop.
Yeah. Now I have great fun putting things into Google and seeing whether it gives consistent results, and it doesn't necessarily. But it's really handy if you know where you're going. It'll tell you when to turn.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you another awful story. This is pre-Google. I was using, what was it? One of those navigation units.
Yeah.
It was like, 100 metres between one turn off and another turn off in the outback of New South Wales. And, turn left to go to, I don't know, whatever outback town it was. And so I do that. I find myself going down a dirt track, and I'm driving a truck with a car carrier and a car on the back. Before you know it, I'm driving down a road that's got boulders that are about a foot in diameter. I'm getting covered in dust. I'm bouncing. It's a narrow track, and I've got this car on. And then before you know it, then I'm starting to go up and down these crazy hills with, massive fall-offs to the side, and I can't back off. And it's the middle of the night, so I just had to keep on going. I'm lucky I didn't hit a flooded stream or something. It was just a complete bloody disaster. So I suppose the lesson is that you should always damn well use a paper map when you're navigating.
Well, actually, we were in New Zealand 3 or 4 years ago, and we'd bought our paper maps, and I don't know if you know New Zealand, but there's only sort of two ways over the mountain range.
Hmm.
There's one just sort of near Queenstown, and then there's another one near Christchurch. The passes. So that Haas Pass, I think was the name of it, down near Queenstown. And it's sort of, so we left Queenstown and we drove for a while. It was pretty wet weather and so on. And apparently there was a waterfall at Haas Pass, or whatever it's called, that was sort of, had washed away part of the road and put rocks and that over the road. And what they were doing is you'd get there and they would hopefully clear the road about lunchtime, and then they'd let the cars and buses go through. And then overnight it would get the rocks rocked across the road again and it would all be closed. And this great line of traffic waiting for the pass, like we were still a long way from where the problem was, but we were miles from anywhere and miles from mobile coverage. And there was this great long line of traffic. None of them knew where they were because, hey, they were relying on their navigation and they didn't have any mobile coverage.
I know, like when I was 30 years ago, I was in New Zealand. I'm driving down some backcountry road, and you look left, and the whole side of the hill has just disappeared into the ground.
Yep.
And bloody tastic. Not what I wanted.
Well, we didn't get through the pass because it was raining too hard, and we had to turn around and come back. But yeah, it was 2-hour drive back to mobile coverage. It was, yeah.
Scary place, New Zealand.
Yeah. So I like a paper map, but that's just me. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Question for you, Roger. How come you didn't try doing taking a differential GPS for your walking adventure? So you have the phone sit on your fridge, and then you send it, every however many seconds a thing saying what its new location is. So your other end can go and subtract it from.
But I don't think. I mean, I've been taking walks with two phones, and they give different results. So
Well, I've got another A11 that's broken, and you're welcome to it. The screen's not good. Build a diff.
yeah. I mean, I know the aviation industry have a GPS correction, but I mean, I was hoping to be able to do so as I said, one of the applications that I thought I would have, and that's why I wanted motion sensors, was to be able to put the phone, I don't know, some time ago on the list, somebody was talking about wanting to map a pipeline with GPS.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh yeah, you'd just be able to put the phone down and leave it there for an hour and come back and get a really accurate GPS reading, and then take it to some other point on it and put it down and get another really accurate GPS reading. And but yeah, I don't know that I.
So you're within 1.8, but I believe that there's a military code or whatever that you can. I'm not sure if it's available on the phones, but like the proper GPS.
I don't think I think they've taken the jitter off it now. It used to be military jitter.
Just the jitter. There's extended code or whatever to get the correct location. And it's used in surveying, like the surveyors when I'm doing construction, they come down, they put the thing down, and
yeah, maybe they've got.
It's accurate in like millimeters, and it's the height that's the only thing that varies a bit, and it's a bit, but that you always pick up a level on the street anyway, so you could always get that accurate.
Yeah, I haven't found the altitude one to be very accurate at all, but it's just fun.
Yeah,
I've done a fair bit of work with GPS, not talking to the sensors themselves, but just dealing with the data. Just put a link in the chat. One of my long-standing customers, he's involved in professional sports, and if you go to that website, there's these devices that or soccer players wear them a lot during training, and league. Yeah, a fair number of league, rugby league and AFL players as well. And it's like a vest with a GPS unit on the back.
Yeah.
And they record their training sessions as they run around the field and so on.
So
and,
they must be pretty accurate to be able to make use of that, mustn't they?
Yeah, they are pretty accurate. Yeah. John, you're asking what processing we do with that on the GPS things and so on. It's ages since I coded it up, but the GPS data, when it comes in, we run a Butterworth filter over the GPS data to sort of smooth it out a bit, if that means anything to you. And then we just do some other sanity checks. Occasionally you get a file where everything's all fine, and they're standing still for a while, then all of a sudden they zoom off at 30, 40, 50 kilometers an hour, and they forgot to take the unit off and they've jumped in the car.
So you're having to smooth the data even from those units, are you?
A little bit, yeah. It just they are a little bit jittery, and also we also smooth that. They've got an accelerometer in them as well, and we smooth out the accelerometry. That's quite a bit more jittery, the accelerometry, but you sort of expect that. It's on a human being. Human being's not moving smoothly by any means.
I believe some of the farmers use beacons around their farm to get a much more accurate version of GPS.
Yeah, I was just reading up on that in the last week for auto steer. They have a base station. I think there's a lot of public ones that you can subscribe to a data connection to them, and they'll send a correction factor every second, and that gets fed back into the GPS unit.
Yeah.
It spits out a corrected result, and so then they can get centimeter accurate direct locations, so that they can steer a tractor in a straight line in a paddock. They can probably make some assumptions about the where the GPS location's moving to. So it's only moving in one direction pretty much, or slightly off it, so you wouldn't be going backwards and then forwards and then backwards a bit. So and then it because I was looking, there's a open source project that people have made their own auto steer for their own tractors, because auto steers I was actually talking to my cousin, and he paid like $15,000 for one, and there's ones that are just like with the ones that you can make yourself. It was probably under $2,000. You got to there's some assembly required. So you got to make an attachment that goes on the steering wheel of the tractor, and make up a circuit like with an Arduino, and that tells the our motor to turn the steering wheel and stuff like that. And it has GPS that you for obviously the location, and then some software that plans where the tractor has to go.
It sounds as though there's a lot of variability then in the quality of the GPS units themselves. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'd say for sure. And the phone ones just aren't intended for continuous streams. They're just taking a GPS thing every couple of seconds at most. So and they're not intended for the accuracy down to the centimeter. Maybe an expensive phones, that might be different. But
Well, I'm only on the cheap ones, but also like in the aviation units, they actually count the number of satellites that they've got access to, and if they haven't got enough access to the satellites, a little red light comes on, which apparently some people have ignored to their detriment. People who landed thought they were landing, I think it was it Shepparton or somewhere, but yeah, they weren't. Yeah. So sometimes like in the aviation industry, they actually tell you when they expect that that there won't be enough satellites for the GPS to work. You get a notification that there's an expectation that there won't be enough satellites.
yeah, we get a number of satellites in these sporting files as well. The number of satellites and they can vary over time in a file. And in really large stadiums, you actually have problems with GPS there because the stands are just so huge. They block a couple of the satellites. You'll only have one or two overhead, and you need at least three really to
get a good result.
Yep.
Yeah, well, that might be part of it. Actually, my where I most hated it. Have you guys been to Mona at all in Tassie? Oh well, the museum down in Mona, there's no labels on any of the exhibits, and you may well realise that I'm not a mobile phone user, and I'm not okay with mobile phones, especially Apple phones. But what you got when you went to Mona was you got given I don't know whether it was an Apple phone or an Apple something or other, and you were supposed to carry it around with you. And when you got to draw it, you go into a room and it would have all of the exhibits in the room. But quite often we would find that, no, you've got to walk around a bit because often it was showing the previous room or the next room, it was, It didn't seem, it seemed like it wasn't accurate enough for what they were trying to use it for. And I presume it was GPS, but I don't know, yeah.
I would have thought if you're doing something like that, maybe a beacon would have been a more appropriate thing to use, or am I misunderstanding beacons?
No, I think that's probably a good, because although I don't know, I mean, the COVID Safe app was just using signal strength, which is so I don't know. That's Bluetooth beacons. I think you really need you actually need an interrogation of some sort. GPS is triangulation, but from a long way away. But yeah, you sort of need to be able to measure distance, not just signal strength, I think, which I think is all beacons will do. But I mean, I wasn't trying to do any, I was just trying to see what I still am, just trying to see what all of these great sensors on the phone can do. But yeah.
So which other sensors have you actually played with?
Well, there's the accelerometer or motions, and there's an orientation sensor too. So so it's called an accelerometer. Is it, Lachlan, or?
Accelerometer, that's measures motion.
Yeah. So I mean that was a bit interesting because when you look at that, you've always got one dimension, which is 9.8 meters per second.
Or like I do, if it's 1G, and it'll just have
1G,
just like 11111 on one of them, or they just discount that and get rid of it, make it 0, and just take it into account that that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, well, when I was doing it, I thought, why the hell am I getting, 1G?
Yeah.
So, but that gives you whether the phone's, which way up the phone is, I suppose. But yeah.
That presumably is one that counts steps.
Pardon?
Presumably that's the one that counts steps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can be used to count steps. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, with the sporting stuff, we use it. That unit, it's not a phone in their hand. It's strapped to their body, and it's in the dead center of their back.
Yeah.
And we actually use it to work out whether their left foot or their right foot is touching the ground, just on the slight drift of whether their the y-axis is going one way or the other.
Yeah.
And so GPS and accelerometer, you can work out quite a bit about what someone's doing.
Good to get an accelerometer onto some of those gymnasts and divers.
Oh yeah, boy. When they're doing those spins, I'm sure they just probably clip the machine itself and get nonsense readings out of it.
No, I mean, what I was wanting to use the accelerometer for was to actually, as I said, the idea was to put the phone down in a spot and take averages, and I wanted to use the accelerometer for when I picked it up and moved it somewhere else to turn off that set of averages and start another set. But I've got nowhere near that, except that might be why I'm getting some of the results that I'm getting, because there's a bit of code in there that's turning off the averaging at some stage. I don't know.
Oh, what you'll need to do, Roger, is when you pick up the phone, you've got to do 3 turns and then put it down somewhere else.
Well, that's right. Yeah. And in fact, the averaging software is taking averages when you're walking, maybe because I walk that slowly, but that's one way of smoothing it out. So what were you using a Butterworth filter, did you say?
Yeah, Butterworth, it's called.
Butterworth, yeah.
And that's, I can't even remember the mass behind it or anything like that. That coded it up about 10 years ago now. That was the one that the customer said to use, so we just did it. It's pretty simple. The implementation I got it from was just an Excel spreadsheet, and with that, it's nothing too flash. It just sort of gets rid of the smooths out the line, basically.
Yeah, it's taking out the worst cases of the.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to, that data you were getting, it's not going to smooth that out enough. That was pretty random, those jitters.
No, I thought it was just jumping between towers, but I don't know where it's from. But
yeah, I think it's just like we were saying before, the quality of the different GPS devices and so on.
Could be, yeah.
Because it's I'd say that the phone's working, it's got to preserve battery life, so it's probably shutting down the GPS completely between readings and so on. So
that's what the latest phone is. The earliest one just sort of sends the battery.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And so it's probably it probably gives it a very limited amount of time to lock in the towers and then to lock in. And if it hasn't, if it gave it a bit more time, you'd probably get a more precise reading each one. But
well, and plus we've, Delphi has sort of made its own assumptions too. So you don't, as I said, I did look into a bit of the code, and part of the code was if it hasn't moved, it doesn't give a change result, but but there's an epsilon specified there, you know what I mean? So in fact, they've specified how much it has to move before they'll actually give you a change result too.
I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in Android, the later versions, there is some sort of notification that your application can get that your phone has started moving again, sort of thing. Because whenever my phone is sitting here on the desk, and almost certainly when I pick it up and walk out, I'll get about 3 or 4 meters or so, and it's going to go bing, and there's going to be just like a news alert, something like that. And it happens almost every time that it's been sitting there for a couple of hours, and then I move to the next location. It's like, oh, he's got the phone. I'll ping him and let him know that you're in lockdown, or case numbers or something like that. So there must be something in the operating system that when it goes from being completely idle to moving, that applications can hear about it.
Yeah, and they're probably all settings on the phone too, which you can override. And I don't know.
Apparently, Google can tell when you go into the toilet. Or based on, well, I guess some would be obvious, like with just GPS location. But
Probably listening and recording the data and the text.
there's probably some accelerometer info and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, that's which way your phone's oriented, number 1 or number 2.
Yes, Jeff, you should turn the camera off, Jeffrey.
Or is it Siri?
Because my phone often, the screen comes to light when I pick it up. Just turns on automatically. And then, of course, I'll go to turn it on, so I turn it off instead.
Yeah.
I suppose by way of wisecracks and historical one, the satellites determined that the Earth was pear-shaped. Well, it's ellipsoidal, of course, but you could come back and say or ask, did we need a multi-million-dollar satellite program to tell us that?
I think we have always known that, which is why I have a bit of a problem with flat earthers. I mean, you know, Captain Cook used longitude and latitude to a great extent long before we had satellites or anything. Yeah.
Should throw those flat earthers off the edge, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
Well, good night all. I'm going to head off.
Yeah, good night.
Well,
No.
thanks,
Thanks, Roger. That's very interesting.
Thanks, Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Roger.
Yeah,
thank
thanks,
you.
thanks, Roger. That was interesting.
No, not really, but you know, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, that was good.
It was very good.
Well, it gave me an overview of the fact that even after all this time, Android development does not seem to have settled down much. That every time, you know, you only got to blink your eyes and something's changed.
Yeah. Well, I think that's deliberate though, isn't it? I mean, it's sort
Well,
of
Android
it's
itself is,
maintaining Google's grip on the
Yeah.
whole thing.
yeah.
And I want to sell you a new phone every other year.
Yeah,
Well,
but it's open source, isn't it? Android?
No, it's Google.
No,
No, Google uses it, but I think it's open source.
yeah, it's an open source operating system that no one can contribute to except Google. So it's a closed open source.
and then they have their own add-on, like all the Google apps and various other bits. The
Play
App
Store.
Yeah,
Play Store. Yeah.
Closed. That's it.
Yep.
So Google owns mobile phones.
I think
Oh,
Google
half
owns,
of them.
Yeah, half of them. Yeah.
Google owns half the world, doesn't it?
True. True.
Doing very well for 2 students who stole a piece of code from the deck.
Oh, well, good night all, and thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you later.
Night
See you
all.
all, guys.
Yeah.
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 Good night all. Thanks, Roger.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. No.
Okay.